Hello and welcome to this mark scheme. We're looking at the exam from May 2014 and it's the paper 3 biology. And before I start to go through this, you should know that the grade boundaries for this were fairly high, and it's also produced nationally, I think, one of the lowest pass rates. So you are looking at a hard paper, and it's worth bearing that in mind. I don't want you leaving this feeling depressed. It is a hard paper. I will share the grade boundaries with you right at the end. Please try to be strict with yourself in the marking, and we'll see how you did at the end. And I'll give useful tips as we go through it every step of the way. Beginning then with question number 1, which looks at a table here. It says table 1 shows information about the mass of fish caught by UK fishermen between 2002 and 2010. What are they going to want us to do with this? Well, the first question says calculate the percentage of fish caught from sustainable sources in 2010. So we're clearly going to be looking at this row of the table here. Sustainable sources is here. And before we can do it, we need to figure out, this is what it's asking us to do, to figure out the number that goes in that column there, isn't it, the percentage. And the good thing about this is that there's a clue, because you can check that you know how to do it by trying to work out some of the earlier rows in the table. So we could check row number 1. Now I'm guessing that it's looking for this number, the sustainable number, divided by the mass of fish caught from all sources, and then times by 100. Let's give it a go and see, shall we? Let's check it on that first one. So here's my calculator. I'm going to do 427.8 divided by 690 times 100, and it equals 62. So that's proof that we know how to do the actual sum. So in this case, it will be 465. Oh, that's a bit thick, isn't it? Let me see if I can trim my pen down a little bit. That really is too fat. And we're going to divide that by 611.5. So this number here, 611.5. So we'll do that division and multiply by 100. And it should come out as, let me have a look here. The answer is 76.04. Now the mark scheme says correct answer with or without working gains 2 marks, so you don't need to show your working, although it's always wise to for reasons we've discussed before. And it says allow an extra decimal place like 76.042, that's fine as well. But usually in an exam, you would go to one more decimal place than the rest of it shown, just to be on the safe side. You wouldn't want to go in any more detail than that. So you've got 2 marks if you've got 76.04. If you showed this part of the sum, and you forgot to times by 100, you can still have 1 mark. Okay, so far so good. Moving down the page. Oh, we're at the end of the first page already. What a nice surprise. Let's turn over. Okay, so question 1A2 is asking you to describe the pattern in the table. I'll bring the table back so we can have a little look at it. So here's the table, and it's saying describe the pattern for the mass of the fish caught from all sources. So this is the all sources column here. Now, although describe usually means say what you see, I think we're going to struggle to get 4 marks just by saying what we see. Let's try. The first point to make is that the mass of fish caught fell from 2002 to 2008. 1 mark for that. A mark if you've said that after 2008, the mass of the fish increased again. So it fell from 2002 to 2008, but it rose again after 2008. Now that's only 2 marks, and there really is nothing else left to say. You could put some numbers on your answer, which is always to be encouraged. That would be a useful thing to do. But I still don't think that you could get all 4 marks for doing that. So saying that it fell from 2002 to 2008 is good. Saying that it rose again after 2008 to 2010 is good. But I think to get the full 4 marks, we're now going to have to give a bit of reasoning, which is it goes a little bit against the idea of describing. But it's a lot of marks just for describing. So I think a little bit of explanation is needed. So I would say that up to 2008, overfishing was going on. Too many fish were being caught, taken out of the sea. And then after 2008, some measures, useful measures, were put in place to restrict fishing to bring the numbers back up. Now that could be that the government imposed quotas to say they were putting limits on the numbers of fish that could be caught, or it could just be that they brought in some sort of net restrictions. They either said you've now got to start using smaller nets, or the nets you're using have got to have a wider gauge in them, in other words bigger holes, so that the younger fish can get through to breed. That's how the 4 marks would be obtained. I can't see another way of doing it, I'm afraid. Right, let's move down. So heading down the page, we're going to have a look at the questions that appear next. Let's have a little look here. So we've got question 1A2. Suggest why the percentage of fish caught from sustainable sources is increasing. Well, that's due to greater awareness of sustainable fishing techniques by the public. They know more about it, or a greater demand. People these days want to have fish caught from sustainable sources. Many people won't eat fish caught in the traditional way. So it's either greater public demand or greater public awareness bringing that about. And 2 methods of maintaining fish stocks at a sustainable level are, firstly, by imposing quotas. So the idea that a law is brought in to say this is the maximum fish that you can catch in any given time, so bringing in a quota, and also either by using smaller nets so they don't catch as many fish, or using nets with a larger, and the word is gauge. That just means that the mesh size is bigger. In fact, you could actually say mesh size, larger mesh size, if you feel better saying that. So the mesh size is bigger. So the younger fish get away and can breed and increase the numbers again. Not a nice question that, but let's continue. So this question says, in a fish farm, large numbers of fish are grown in cages in the sea. Why do fish in the cages grow faster than fish of the same species that are free in the sea? You should refer to energy in your answer. And that's a really important thing to remember. It does say there that you should refer to energy in your answer. For 4 marks, so lots of marks again. So what sort of marking points is the examiner looking for? Well, firstly, by putting them in cages, movement is restricted. So there's less movement of the fish. That means that less energy is lost from them, because energy needs to be got from respiration, remember. So by restricting the movement, less energy is lost from the fish. Now it says on the mark scheme, do not allow no energy lost, because some will be lost. So it's got to say less energy will be lost from the fish. So 1 mark for that, due to their restricted movement. Also, in the cages, there will be more food available, because they'll be fed food from the owners of the fish farm. So more food is available, or it could even be better quality food designed for growth, and usually that implies that it's got more protein in it to speed up growth. And you could add that therefore more energy is converted to biomass. So more energy converted to biomass would get you a mark. So for 4 marks, movement is restricted, so less energy is lost from the fish. They're also given more food because they're fed inside the cages, or they're given better food, but you can only have 1 of those marks, you can't have both of them. And then more of the energy from the food is converted to actual biomass, which is the edible part of the fish. Difficult question again, so a mark out of 4. If you just take a moment to work out how many marks out of 13 you got there. Quite a hard opening question that. See how you did. Now this is one of my favourite pages because it says do not write on it. Do not write on this page, answer in the spaces provided. Why am I mentioning this page? Well, because last year, I think it was on paper 2, there was one of these pages just before the last question, and lots of people got to the back and thought they'd finished and didn't answer the last question. They lost quite a lot of marks because they didn't even see the last question. So if you get one of these pages, do not ever assume it's the end of the exam. Clearly this one isn't, because it's only page 5, but it is possible that you could get one of these towards the end. Always look for the words that let you know that you have finished the paper. It's amazing how many people don't. Question number 2. In this question, you'll be assessed on using good English. We'll assume that you're going to do good English. Deforestation affects the environment. Deforestation is causing a change in the amounts of different gases in the atmosphere. Notice that I'm circling useful parts of the question, and I'd urge you to do the same. These changes cause global warming and climate change. Figure 2 shows an area of deforestation. There it is, horrible sight, look, huge numbers of trees knocked down. Give the reasons why deforestation is taking place and describe how deforestation is causing the change in the amounts of different gases. Now again, I'd urge you here, because this is a 6-mark question, I don't think it'll be a question worth any more than this. It'll be one of the biggest questions on the whole paper. So just think about what they're asking. Give reasons why deforestation is taking place and describe how it's causing the change in the different amounts of gases in the atmosphere. So you've got 2 things to think about. Why is it happening? And how is it causing changes in the amounts of different gases in the atmosphere? And very often you can get absorbed in the first part of the answer, writing blah, 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 and you forget to do the second part. And you're going to lose loads of marks by doing that. So constantly check this. Right, reasons for deforestation. I won't write these down. I'll just go through them quite quickly. Wood or timber is used for construction, or building houses, or building buildings, or used for paper. So 1 mark for explaining what the wood is being used for building or for producing paper. 1 mark if you mention the idea of growing plants for biofuels or motor fuel. So in other words, the wood is being used as a kind of fuel. 1 mark if you've mentioned that land might be used for agriculture, for growing food such as rice fields or for grazing cattle. So 3 marks so far. 1 for mentioning what the timber is used for building or for paper. 1 mark if you've mentioned that the wood is used for burning as a fuel. 1 mark if you've mentioned that the land is used for agriculture or farming, for either growing crops like rice or for putting cattle on. So far a maximum of 3 marks for this bit here. Now, describe how deforestation is causing changes in the amounts of different gases. See, if you carried on writing about this, you couldn't get any more marks now. You'd max out at 3. You've got to move on to the second part of the question. So, you could mention increasing carbon dioxide due to burning. So burning increases CO2 levels. And by the way, don't just use my shorthand. You need to write it in full, especially when they're looking at the quality of your English. So carbon dioxide is given off by burning of the wood. You could also mention that microbes decompose the wood. They give out carbon dioxide as well. You could also mention that less carbon dioxide is taken in by photosynthesis because the trees have gone. That will get you a mark. And you can also mention that there's an increase in methane, which is a greenhouse gas, and that's due to when you grow rice fields give out methane, and cattle also give out methane. Now watch me go over the borders here. I'm not meant to do this. Methane given out by rice or cattle. Okay, so 3 marks for the second part. Carbon dioxide produced by combustion or burning. Microbes giving out carbon dioxide as they decompose the wood. Less carbon dioxide taken in by photosynthesis. So again, another way that it's increased in the atmosphere. And methane is given out by rice or cattle that might be put on the fields. So a maximum of 6 marks there. And do make sure you understand this one because it is a really common question. There's more room to answer over the page, not that you necessarily need it, and there's the place to write your mark out of 6. Turn over for the next question. That means turn the page over. It doesn't mean you've got to get out of your seat and roll over. You might get into trouble for that in the exam. A good old osmosis question. There's nearly always one on paper 3. Plant roots absorb water from the soil by osmosis. What is osmosis? Well, we've practiced this over and over again. So it's movement of water through a partially permeable membrane. So movement of water, and it's linked the two here. So partially permeable membrane, gets you a mark there. So movement of water through a partially permeable membrane, from a high water concentration to a lower water concentration. All right, so from a higher, I'm looking at the exact wording that it wants here. It's using water potential on there, so we're going to say from a higher water potential to a lower water potential. I think they would allow a higher concentration of water to, well, they would allow a higher concentration of water to a lower concentration of water. And there's another mark here if you mention that it's a passive process, that it doesn't require energy. So the marks again, one for explaining that a partially permeable membrane is involved. If you just use the word membrane, you get a mark. One mark if you mention that it's from a high concentration of water to a lower concentration of water, or from a high water potential to a lower water potential. And one if you've mentioned that it's a passive process or that it requires no energy, up to a maximum of 3 marks there. On to question 3b. This figure shows part of a plant root. It's adapted for absorbing water from the soil. Use the information from figure 3 to explain how this plant root is adapted for absorbing water. Well, 1 mark if you've mentioned that there are many hairs or very thin hairs or hairs that are 1 cell thick here. These are root hairs, but you do need to say that there are many of them, or that they have they're just 1 cell thick. 1 mark if you've mentioned that that increases the surface area of the root. 1 mark if you've mentioned that that means that there will be more diffusion or osmosis into the root. And as we're talking about water, I'd prefer that you said osmosis, but diffusion is allowed on the mark scheme. A rare moment of generosity there. Okay, so the 3 marks, 1 for mentioning that there are many root hairs, 1 if you've mentioned that these increase the surface area of the root, and 1 if you've mentioned that this results in more osmosis of water into the root. Okay, so a mark out of 6 for that question, please. So this question is asking you about blood. It's saying give 1 function of white blood cells. Now you did this back in year 10. So you could just put defense against pathogens, or defense against bacteria, or defense against viruses, or defense against microorganisms. All right, so that's the function. You could say that they engulf bacteria or viruses. You could say that they produce antibodies, or you could say that they produce an immune response. It says do not allow destroy disease. So that's a bit too vague, all right? So saying that it's defense against disease. Oh, no, sorry, can we allow that? No, defense against microorganisms is allowed. So defense, let's write it here, defense against microorganisms or microbes is allowed. You could mention engulfing, you could mention producing antibodies. Any of those things are allowed. Which of the following is a feature of platelets? Well, it's this one. They are small fragments of cells. Small fragments of cells. Urea is transported to the blood plasma from where it is made to where urea is excreted. Blood plasma carries urea from where it is made in the liver. It's made in the liver from the remains of waste protein. Waste protein broken down to amino acids and then into ammonia and then into urea. And it is excreted in the kidneys. So either kidney or kidneys allowed there. Figure 4 shows a section through the human heart. Structure X is a valve. Indeed it is. If the valve stops working, it may need to be replaced. A scientist is designing a new heart valve. The scientist knows that the valve must be the correct size to fit the heart. Suggest 2 other factors the scientist needs to consider so that the newly designed valve works effectively in the heart. Well, a whole host of things here. I won't write them down. 1 is that it doesn't result in an immune response, or it isn't rejected by white blood cells. Another is whether it's a long-lasting material, that it doesn't decompose or corrode. Another is that it's strong to withstand pressure. Another is that it will open at the right pressure. Another is that it doesn't cause clotting of the blood. Another is that it doesn't leak and that it does prevent backflow of blood. and another one is that it isn't toxic to the person. So again, it doesn't cause an immune response, it isn't toxic to the person, that it's long lasting and doesn't decompose in the body, that it's strong to withstand pressure, that it will open at the right pressure, that it doesn't cause blood clotting, and that it does prevent backflow of blood and does not leak. So a total mark out of 6. I really don't like this paper very much at all. I dare say you don't. Let's move on. The leaves of most plants have stomata. Name the cells which control the size of stomata. Well, the ones that are around the side of the stoma are called guard cells. Guard cells. Give one function of stomata. Well, to allow carbon dioxide to enter the leaf is the best answer, I would say. To allow carbon dioxide to enter the leaf. You could also put to allow oxygen to leave. It does also allow control of water or control of transpiration as well, or to restrict the amount of water lost or to restrict the amount of evaporation of water. So it allows carbon, and I think the best answer is to allow carbon dioxide to enter and also to restrict the amount of water that is given out by stomata too. Now I know this caused a bit of consternation, this one here. It says figure 5 shows part of the surface of a leaf. The length and width are both 0.1 millimetres. And then it says calculate the number of stomata per square millimetre. So what you need to think is this. If this is 0.1 millimetre, then if we were to scale it up, you would have 10 0.1s going across here. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You have 10 there, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 going down there. Which means that, if you look at that, this is the equivalent of this square here. So how many of those squares make up a millimetre? The answer is 10 that away, 10 that way, so it's 100. So there will be 100 of these per square millimetre. How many stomata do we have here? We have one there, we have one there. So there are 2 stomata within our little 1 square. We know that there are 100 squares in total, so that means it's 2 times 100. So the answer will be that there will be 200 stomata per square millimetre. Now that's one of those questions that's unlikely to come up again in quite that format, but that's how it's done. So 2 marks for that. 1 mark if you showed that there would be 100 squares in the square millimetre. Not a nice one, but there you go. It is a tough higher paper. Let's turn over. A different plant species has 400 stomata per square millimetre. Having a large number of stomata can be a disadvantage to a plant. Give one disadvantage. Well, it means that they will lose more water. So more water loss is the answer. It also means that the plants will wilt in hot conditions, or that they don't survive so well in hot conditions. But simply just put the disadvantage is greater or more water loss. That will get you the mark. A student investigated the loss of water from plant leaves. They did the following. They took 10 leaves from the plant. They weighed them. They hung them in the classroom for 4 days. They weighed them again and calculated the mass of the water lost by the leaf. And repeated that again, this time with grease spread on the upper surfaces, and then repeated it with grease spread on both the upper and lower surfaces of the plant. So basically they've hung leaves out to dry. Some of them are just kind of raw leaves. Some of them have got grease on the upper surface. Some have got grease on the top and lower surface. Now I'll tell you now that what grease does is it blocks up the stomata so water cannot evaporate from the plants. But what's it asking you to do here? Well, it says table 2 shows the student's results. When no grease was added, then the mass of water loss was that. With grease on the upper surface, less water was lost. With grease on both surfaces, whoa, hardly any water was lost. What's it going to want us to do with this information? Well, it says what mass of water was lost in 4 days through the upper surfaces of the leaves. Let's bring the table back. So it's saying what mass of water was lost in 4 days through the upper surfaces of the leaf? Well, when the upper and lower surfaces were greased, it was there. Grease on the upper surface is only there, and no grease on the top one. So let's have a think. Well, the answer is going to be 0.12. Why? It's the difference between this, look. So we're looking through the mass of water lost through the upper surfaces. This is without the upper surface greased. This is with the upper surface greased. So we look for the difference between those. So it's going to be 0.98 minus 0.86, which equals 0.12. Oh, and I've just written that in the wrong place, haven't I? Oh, what an idiot. That should go there. It's only worth 1 mark. So if you've got 0.12, you've got your mark there, look. Sorry about the confusion. I might just get rid of that. What does the second part want? It says, well, very little water was lost when the lower surfaces of the leaves were covered in grease. Explain why. For 3 marks. So what can we say? Well, firstly, the lower surface has most stomata. So there are more stomata on the lower surface. 1 mark if you've said that. 1 mark if you've explained that they're now covered in grease. So, most stomata on the lower surface of a leaf. That's a fact. We've now covered them in grease, and so water cannot now evaporate from them, or there can be no evaporation or transpiration from them, from the stomata. Okay, so again, most stomata on the surface, the lower surface of the leaf, they're now coated in grease, so water cannot evaporate from the stomata. For 3 marks. Not a bad one, that's quite a nice one. In fact, usually papers get harder, but this one feels as though it's getting a little bit easier as we go along, doesn't it, actually? Which is a weird old thing. Well done, exam board. Okay, let's carry on moving on up. Oh, over the page, in fact. Sorry, I forgot to ask you to record the mark on the previous page. Make sure you've jotted down your mark. I think it was out of 9 before you move on to this one. Right, question number 6. Figure 6 shows the core body temperature and the skin surface temperature of a cyclist before, during and after a race. Now this line here is the core body temperature. That just means inside the body. If you could take a temperature inside your body, perhaps you put a thermometer in your mouth, for example, to get the core temperature. And the bottom one here shows the skin surface temperature during the course of the race. When the cyclist finished the race, his core body temperature started to decrease. How long did the race last? Well, the race lasted 1 hour and 15 minutes, or 75 minutes, depending on which way you want to say it. How are we working that out? Let's have a look. Well, the race appears to have started here. Ooh, it's wobbling. Appears to have started there. And it says his core body temperature started to decrease when he finished the race, or she finished the race. So that was there. So we need to know the distance, or the time, I should say, between here. So it's 9:15. There, 9:15. To 10:30. So that's 1 hour and 15 minutes, or 75 minutes if you prefer. Or you can even put 1.25 hours if you like, 1¼ hours. Okay, moving on. Describe and explain. Now that's more like it, you see. Describe and explain the different patterns shown in the core body temperature and the skin surface temperature between 9:15 and 10:15. So it's important that we're only looking at these times. So we're looking at the difference between the core body temperature and the skin surface temperature between those 2 times. So let's head back to the graph, shall we? Let's move down here like this. Here we go. So we're just looking at this zone here, aren't we? From 9:15 to 10:30. So let's have a look what the key differences are. Right, there are marks for any of these things. Firstly, if you said that the core body temperature increases steadily, you've got a mark. Using numbers is useful, but weirdly, they're not looking for them on this question. They don't mention them. Having said, make sure you use numbers, they're not looking for them. So, 1 mark if you've said that this increases, that's a description that increases steadily. A mark if you put that it's due to increase in respiration or more muscle contraction. That's what's heating the inside of the body up. There's more respiration giving out heat energy, or more muscle contraction. 1 mark if you put that energy is being released as a waste product, or heat's being released as a waste product, if you like. 1 mark if you've mentioned that the skin temperature falls for the first hour and then levels off. 1 mark if you've put that that's due to sweating, sweat evaporating from the skin. 1 mark for mentioning sweating, 1 mark for mentioning evaporation from the skin. So that's quite a lot to take in, isn't it? So let me go through those marking points again for you. So the points are 1 mark for explaining that there is an increase in core temperature. 1 mark if you've explained that this is due to increase in respiration or muscular activity. 1 mark if you've mentioned that it's because more energy is being released. 1 mark if you've mentioned that the skin temperature decreases. That's a description, isn't it? 1 mark if you've referred to the role of sweating in that as the sweat evaporates, it's removing heat energy. And 1 mark that, so 1 mark for sweating, 1 mark if you've used the word evaporation or evaporating connected with the sweat there. Ooh. So 6 marks available there for you. Over the page, after 10:30, the core body temperature decreased. Explain how changes in blood vessels supplying the skin cause the skin surface temperature to increase. So the core body temperature decreased, but the skin surface temperature increases, look. And what was the role of the blood vessels in that? Well, 1 mark if you've mentioned that there is dilation of blood vessels that are supplying the skin. So dilation of blood vessels supplying the skin. They widen and allow more blood to go through. Now, it's really important that it's the arteries that dilate to allow water in, not the capillaries. Capillaries can't dilate. So dilation, that's terrible. Look at that. That's a terrible way of spelling it. Dilation of the blood vessels going to the skin, or vasodilation, if you want to say that, is a good way of cutting it shorter. So vasodilation. So more blood flows to the surface of the skin or near the surface of the skin into the capillaries that go to the surface of the skin. So more blood in capillaries closer to the surface of the skin. So more heat is lost in that way. So 2 marks, 1 for dilation of blood vessels, 1 mark for explaining that diverts more blood to the surface of the skin so heat can be lost. You could mention radiation or conduction as well if you fancied being really fancy. During the race, the cyclist's blood glucose concentration began to decrease. It fell. Describe how the body responds when the blood glucose concentration begins to decrease. How does it respond? So, 1 mark if you mentioned that the pancreas detects the lower blood sugar glucose. So it's detected by the pancreas. 1 mark for that. So the falling blood sugar level, is caused by, or is detected by the pancreas. 1 mark if you've explained that the pancreas therefore produces glucagon. Now that's a hormone. It's the one that has the opposite effect to insulin. But you need to be really careful about how you spell glucagon. All right. So the pancreas produces glucagon. So the pancreas detects the falling sugar level. It produces glucagon. And then in the liver, the glycogen that had built up in times of plentiful sugar is converted to glucose to increase the blood sugar level again. So 1 mark for explaining that the falling sugar level is detected by the pancreas, 1 mark for explaining that the pancreas releases glucagon, and 1 mark for explaining that the effect of glucagon is to convert glycogen into glucose. You didn't need to mention the liver, though it would be useful to do so, I think. There is also a mark, by the way, for explaining that there is reduced insulin production, that the amount of insulin produced falls. There's a mark for that too, but the 3 marks I've described there are the easiest ways, I think, to get the marks. A mark then out of 12 for that question. Nearly there. So figure 7 shows a model biogas generator. So what's going on in here then? Let's have a look. Well, food waste and water are put into this plastic bottle here. You've got a balloon there, And here you've got a Bunsen burner, which is presumably burning off methane that's being produced by the biogas generator here. Students used the model biogas generator to investigate which type of food waste produces the greatest yield of biogas. In other words, how long will make the Bunsen burner burn for longer. Gas collects in the balloon. The gas is then released through the valve and is burned at the Bunsen burner. So a bit of a safety thing going on there. So basically, the bacteria in here digest the food. The gas collects in here. Then the valve is opened. The gas flows out there and is burnt. The students put 500 grams of potato peelings in the plastic bottle with some water and sealed the apparatus. They released the gas from the balloon after day 2 and timed how long the gas burned for. Released the gas that had collected in the balloon from day 2 to day 4 and timed how long the gas burned for. So they did it twice. And then they repeated the investigation using 500 grams of cooked rice, then 500 grams of cabbage leaves and 500 grams of cooked pasta. Nice experiment if you've got time to do it. Okay, what are they going to ask you about this? Well, here's the table of results. You can see here that you've got the 4 different sorts of foods that we used. You can see that after day 2, no gas was produced, and then varying volumes of gas produced from day 2 to day 4. So question 7a suggests why the gas collected in the balloon and released after day 2 did not burn for 3 marks. That's a lot of marks, isn't it? So why didn't it burn, I wonder? Well, it's because initially there's oxygen in the chamber. So aerobic respiration is used by the microorganisms. So they produce carbon dioxide, which does not burn. So to start with, there would have been oxygen in the apparatus or in the chamber. This means that aerobic respiration would have been used by the bacteria, not anaerobic, which is needed to produce the methane, isn't it? So that means that it would have only produced CO2, which doesn't burn. Now, from day 2, we did start to get biogas. That would be because now the oxygen's run out, so the bacteria are now going to start using anaerobic respiration, which produces the biogas. So let's have a look at what question 7a2 is asking. Suggest why potato peelings produced the most biogas. Well, it's because they had the most carbohydrate in them. All right, they had more carbohydrate, or if you like, more organic material in them. So more carbohydrate and therefore more organic material. Over the page. Scientists investigated the production of biogas from different types of animal manure. Nice. Table 4 shows the scientists' results. Calculate the volume of methane produced from 1 kilogram of cow manure. There's a question you didn't think you'd be answering. How much methane released from a kilogram of cow manure? Let's have a little think. Okay, so with the cow manure then, we've got the volume of methane produced per kilogram, and it is per kilogram, is 0.34. So there we've got that. Now, 65% of that is methane, so we need to do 65% of it, don't we? And if you do that, if you do 0.34 times 65%, the answer that you get is 0.221. They would accept just 0.22. So if you've got 0.22 or 0.221, you've got 1 mark. If you forgot to do something like dividing by the 100 and you ended up with an answer like 22.1, you could still have 1 mark, okay? So 2 marks if you got 0.22 or 0.221. If you showed 34 times 65 but forgot to divide by the 100, then you can have 1 mark, which again is why it's important to always show you're working out in these things. So the volume of methane there is 0.22 or 0.221. One scientist concluded that it would be better to use sheep manure in a biogas generator than to use cow manure. What is the evidence for this conclusion? Use information from table 4 in your answer. So one scientist is suggesting that this manure here is better than that. Well, what's the evidence for it? Let's have a little think. Well, sheep manure produces a higher volume of biogas. Down here, look. I'll move the table down so you can see properly. So it produces a higher volume of biogas than does the cow one. So this produces far more biogas than that in terms of volume. So 1 mark for that. And also it produces biogas with a high percentage of methane. So here it's got more methane in it. Okay, so the 2 marks there, one for explaining that the sheep manure produces more biogas anyway, and secondly that the percentage of biogas in the sheep manure is higher. It would be good to throw some numbers in. If you put some numbers in there, then they can consider those in the marking of your answer. In that case, you didn't need to mention the numbers, but always a good idea to mention them if you can. So mark out of 8 there. Now here's what we're looking for, end of questions. And you should always look for this just in case you think you've reached the end. I mentioned earlier the idea that some people thought they'd got to the end of the paper last year and hadn't, and threw away an enormous quantity of marks. So always look for the end of questions. Right, add up your marks, pause the video for a second, and then I'll look at the grade boundaries. Be warned that last year, nationally, the marks for this paper were very low, so be prepared for maybe for a disappointment. Don't feel down in the dumps if you don't get the grade that you're anticipating here, because last year this was easily the toughest paper. Grade-wise, people dropped a grade or 2, sometimes more, on this paper compared to paper 1 and paper 2, so be prepared. Not trying to worry you. So these are the grade boundaries then for the paper that you've just done. To get an A star, 43% out of 60, which is really, really high, one of the highest for a while. Grade A, 38 out of 60, a B, 33 out of 60, a grade C, 28 out of 60, and a grade D, 23 out of 60. Again, don't worry if you find that your grade is a bit lower than you expected, because this was, for nearly everybody last year, the paper that they performed worse on compared to paper 1 and paper 2. Right, I'm just going to flash up a web address on here for you to go and upload. It'll take you 30 seconds to send me your marks and any questions that you've got based on what you've just seen on this paper. Right, if you wouldn't mind just going to that web address, please, put your name in and the mark that you got and anything else that you found that you didn't understand, anything you want me to go through. And also let me know if you'd like me to do this for the other paper 3 from 2013. I'm more than happy to do that for you as well. Okay, thank you very much indeed for taking part in this, much appreciated. Go to swoop.to/feedback, let me know how you did, and I will see you very soon. Thanks for taking part, and congratulations if you did well. If you didn't do so well, don't be down in the dumps, get back to that revision and all will be well. Ta-ra!